She made 3 babysitters quit before noon. The words echoed through the marble kitchen just as another glass shattered somewhere upstairs. A nervous woman in a pale blue cardigan hurried past the dining room, clutching her purse against her chest, her heels clicking wildly across the polished floor. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vaughn," she said without stopping. "I just can't do this anymore." Then she was gone. The massive front door slammed shut behind her, leaving the mansion trembling in silence for exactly 3 seconds before a loud crash exploded from the second floor again. Nathaniel Vaughn closed his eyes slowly. Manhattan's most feared billionaire investor stood motionless beside a cold cup of espresso, his jaw tight, dark circles shadowing his eyes. He could negotiate billion-dollar mergers without blinking. He could shut down boardrooms with a single sentence. But nothing in his carefully controlled world prepared him for his 7-year-old twins. Upstairs, little feet thundered across hardwood floors. A lamp toppled. Someone screamed. Then came laughter. Not happy laughter. The wild kind children make when they're daring the world to stop them. Nathaniel loosened his tie and started toward the staircase, just as his house manager rushed into the foyer, looking horrified. "Sir," the woman whispered carefully. Miss Ella locked herself inside the music room again, and Ethan poured syrup into the baby grand piano. Nathaniel stopped halfway up the stairs. "The Steinway." The woman nodded weakly. Another crash sounded overhead, and they released the neighbor's dog into the indoor pool. Nathaniel stared upward at the chandelier, trembling from the chaos above. Somewhere in the middle of the madness, his phone buzzed again with messages from investors waiting downtown. He ignored them. For the first time in months, the billionaire looked exhausted instead of powerful. Then the doorbell rang. Nobody moved. A second ring followed. The staff exchanged nervous glances before Nathaniel muttered, "I'll get it." He pulled open the heavy front door, expecting another agency worker ready to quit before even stepping inside. Instead, a young black woman stood there balancing a cardboard drink tray against one hip, while cold November wind whipped strands of curly hair across her face. Her waitress apron peeked out beneath a thrift store coat, and her cheeks were pink from the freezing air. "Delivery for Mr. Vaughn," she said softly. Before Nathaniel could answer, a shrill scream exploded upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of piano keys slamming all at once. The waitress blinked. Another crash. Then tiny footsteps raced down the hallway overhead. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "You should probably leave that on the table." But before she stepped away, the woman tilted her head slightly. Her expression changed. Beneath the noise, beneath the chaos, she heard something else. Crying. Not loud. Hidden. The kind children make when they think nobody cares enough to listen. Upstairs, Ella suddenly appeared at the top of the staircase wearing one glitter boot and a wrinkled princess cape. Her small face was streaked with tears even as she tried to glare at the adults below. "Go away," she shouted. "We don't want another babysitter." Then Ethan emerged behind her holding a stuffed dinosaur with one missing eye. "They all leave anyway," he muttered quietly. The waitress looked up at them for a long moment. Then, without asking permission, she set the coffees down on the entry table and slowly walked toward the stairs. Every employee in the mansion froze. Nathaniel's voice hardened instantly. "Ma'am, I wouldn't do that." But she kept walking anyway. When she reached the bottom stair, she crouched slightly so she wasn't towering over the children. Her voice was calm, warm. "Your mom used to sing to you before bed, didn't she?" The mansion went completely silent. Even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. At the top of the stairs, Ella's angry little face suddenly crumpled. Ethan tightened his grip on the dinosaur. And for the first time in nearly a year, both children stopped running. Nathaniel Vaughn did not understand why the house suddenly felt different. The silence should have been a relief after weeks of screaming, broken lamps, slammed doors, and frightened babysitters rushing out before sunset. But this silence felt unfamiliar, fragile, dangerous somehow. He stood near the staircase, watching the waitress carefully, as if one wrong move might shatter whatever strange spell had settled over his children. Naomi Carter remained crouched at the bottom step, her dark eyes steady on the twins above her. She did not move closer. She did not force a smile. She simply waited. Ella sniffed hard and wiped her nose with the sleeve of her oversized sweater. Ethan stayed half-hidden behind his sister, clutching the old dinosaur tightly against his chest. The boy looked exhausted. Both of them did. Naomi spoke gently. What was her favorite song? Nathaniel felt his chest tighten instantly. Upstairs, Ella's tiny lips parted. You do not know her, she whispered defensively. No, Naomi admitted softly. But I know what it sounds like when somebody misses their mom. The words settled into the mansion like snowfall. Quiet. Heavy. Real. Ethan stared down at her for several long seconds before muttering. She sang Fleetwood Mac when it rained. Nathaniel blinked. He had forgotten that. God help him, he had forgotten. Naomi smiled faintly. That is a good choice. Ella stepped down one stair cautiously. She liked candles too. Yeah. Naomi asked. Ella nodded slowly. Vanilla ones. Nathaniel looked away toward the giant windows lining the foyer because suddenly he could not bear the sight of his children talking about their mother like strangers trying to preserve a fading photograph. For almost a year, he had avoided every conversation about Claire Vaughn because grief felt too large to survive. So instead he buried himself in meetings, private flights, interviews, numbers, and contracts while the mansion grew colder around all of them. Naomi finally stood carefully. Well, she said softly, you two have caused enough destruction for one night. Ethan looked guilty for exactly half a second before Ella crossed her arms again. Miss Parker started crying first, she muttered. Nathaniel almost interrupted, ready to apologize automatically for his children like he always did, but Naomi surprised him. Honestly, she whispered conspiratorially. The syrup in the piano was a little dramatic. Ethan's eyes widened. Then, for the first time all evening, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Nathaniel stared in disbelief. Naomi glanced toward the kitchen. I smell grilled cheese somewhere in this castle. Cook quit yesterday, Ethan answered quietly. That explains a lot, Naomi said. Ella hesitated before asking the question in a tiny voice. Can you make it? Nathaniel expected the woman to laugh awkwardly or refuse politely. Instead, she shrugged off her coat and rolled up the sleeves of her diner uniform. Lead the way. 20 minutes later, the kitchen glowed with warm yellow light, while butter crackled softly on the stove. Snow drifted outside the windows overlooking the city. Ethan sat cross-legged on the counter swinging his feet while Ella arranged potato chips into tiny circles beside the plates. Naomi moved through the kitchen like she belonged there, humming quietly while she cooked. Not once did she raise her voice. Not once did she tell the twins to calm down. And somehow they did. Nathaniel remained frozen near the doorway watching something impossible happen in his own home. The twins were laughing. Not loudly. Not wildly. Just enough to make the room feel alive again. Naomi slid a grilled cheese sandwich onto Ella's plate before glancing toward Nathaniel. You should eat too, she said. He almost answered automatically that he had work. Meetings. Calls. But then Ethan looked up suddenly. Stay, the little boy whispered. Nathaniel could not remember the last time either child had asked him for anything except permission to be left alone. The mansion smelled like butter and toasted bread long after midnight. It was strange how something so simple could soften a place built from steel, marble, and silence. Nathaniel stood alone in his office, staring through the glass wall overlooking the city, while faint laughter drifted down the hallway upstairs. He had almost forgotten what laughter sounded like in this house. For 11 months the Vaughn estate had operated like a museum. Quiet staff, closed doors, careful footsteps, everything polished, everything cold. But tonight there were potato chip crumbs on the kitchen island and tiny fingerprints on the refrigerator door. Somehow that bothered him less than it should have. His phone vibrated again. 23 unread messages. A delayed conference call. A partner waiting in Singapore. Nathaniel silenced the device without reading a single word. Upstairs, another laugh echoed softly. He looked toward the ceiling instinctively. The sound came from Ethan. Nathaniel could not remember the last time his son laughed without forcing it. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Holloway, the elderly house manager, stepped carefully into the office. Sir, she said quietly. The children asked if Miss Carter could stay until morning. Nathaniel blinked. They asked. Mrs. Holloway nodded slowly as though she still could not believe it herself. Ella also requested extra blankets for the movie room. Nathaniel frowned slightly. Movie room? They are building a blanket fort, she answered gently. Somewhere deep inside the mansion, a child squealed with excitement. Nathaniel rubbed a tired hand across his face. She is still here? Yes, sir. Mrs. Holloway hesitated before adding softly. I have not seen the twins this calm since Mrs. Vaughn passed. The room fell quiet after that. Nathaniel stared at the family photograph sitting untouched on his bookshelf. Claire smiling in a white sweater. Ethan missing his front tooth. Ella holding a pumpkin almost bigger than her face. He remembered that day clearly now. Apple picking in Vermont. Claire laughing because Ethan insisted pumpkins should have names. Nathaniel swallowed hard. He had been so busy trying not to drown in grief that he never realized the children had been drowning beside him. Upstairs, the laughter stopped suddenly. Then came tiny running footsteps. A moment later, Ethan appeared barefoot in the office doorway, clutching his dinosaur under one arm. Dad. Nathaniel straightened immediately. What is wrong? The boy shifted awkwardly. Nothing. He glanced down the hallway nervously before whispering. Miss Naomi says forts need flashlights. Nathaniel stared at him in confusion. Flashlights? Ethan nodded seriously. For atmosphere. The boy pronounced the word carefully as though it were very important. Nathaniel almost smiled despite himself. Almost. I think we have some in the garage, he said quietly. Ethan lingered in the doorway another second. Dad. Yes. The child looked unusually uncertain. You are not going to make her leave tomorrow, right? Nathaniel felt the question land heavily between them. Ethan's small fingers tightened around the stuffed dinosaur while he waited for an answer. For months the twins had chased every nanny out of the house. Screaming. Hiding. Refusing to speak. Refusing to sleep. Yet now there was fear in Ethan's eyes for a completely different reason. He was afraid someone kind might disappear again. Nathaniel looked toward the hallway where warm lights spilled from the movie room across the hardwood floor. Naomi's voice drifted softly through the house. Calm. Gentle. Real. No. Nathaniel heard himself say quietly. She is not leaving tonight. Ethan's shoulders relaxed instantly. The little boy nodded once before turning toward the hallway again. Halfway there, he stopped suddenly and looked back. Mom would have liked her, he whispered. Then he disappeared around the corner, leaving Nathaniel completely alone in the office with tears burning unexpectedly behind his eyes. Morning arrived softly over Manhattan, pale winter sunlight spilling across the enormous windows of the Vaughn estate. For the first time in nearly a year, the mansion did not wake to screaming. No doors slammed. No staff rushed through the hallways whispering anxiously into headsets. Instead, the faint smell of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen while quiet music floated through the house. Nathaniel paused halfway down the staircase, confused by the unfamiliar peace. He loosened the cuff of his dress shirt slowly as he listened. Ella was giggling, not the sharp, defiant laughter she used when trying to provoke adults. This was softer, real. Nathaniel stepped into the kitchen carefully and stopped cold at the doorway. Ethan sat at the marble island wrapped in a blanket like a burrito while Naomi flipped pancakes at the stove. Ella stood beside her on a chair much too tall for her tiny frame, carefully sprinkling chocolate chips onto a plate with serious concentration. Music played softly from Naomi's phone resting near the coffee machine. Fleetwood Mac. Nathaniel's chest tightened immediately. Claire used to play that exact song every Sunday morning while dancing around the kitchen barefoot with the twins. He had not heard it in this house since the funeral. Naomi glanced over her shoulder when she noticed him. Morning, she said naturally, as though billionaires walked into her kitchen every day. Nathaniel blinked once. Good morning. Ethan looked up quickly. She made Mickey Mouse pancakes. They are abstract art pancakes, Naomi corrected calmly. Ella grinned proudly. Mine looks like New Jersey. Nathaniel stared at the plate. It did, unfortunately, resemble New Jersey. Before he could answer, the twins burst into laughter again. The sound hit him unexpectedly hard. Mrs. Holloway entered quietly carrying fresh towels, but froze when she saw the scene before her. Her eyes widened slightly. In almost 12 months, nobody had managed to get the twins into the kitchen before school without tears, arguments, or complete emotional collapse. Yet there they sat in mismatched pajamas eating pancakes beside a waitress who looked entirely at home among the chaos. Nathaniel noticed something else too. The children kept looking at Naomi. Not with fear. Not with manipulation. With trust. He had nearly forgotten what trust looked like on their faces. Naomi slid a coffee mug toward him across the counter. Black. No sugar. Nathaniel frowned slightly. How did you know? She shrugged. You look like somebody who forgot sweetness existed. Ethan snorted into his orange juice. Nathaniel almost smiled again before catching himself. I have a board meeting in 45 minutes, he said automatically, checking his watch. Ella's smile faded instantly. Ethan lowered his fork. Naomi noticed the shift immediately. How long? She asked quietly. Nathaniel looked at her. Excuse me. Your meeting, she repeated gently. How long are you going to be gone? Nathaniel opened his mouth to answer, but stopped. He honestly did not know. Most days blended together into flights, conference rooms, contracts, and exhausted late-night returns after the twins were asleep. Naomi turned back toward the stove. That is the problem, she said softly. The kitchen fell still. Nathaniel straightened slightly. I beg your pardon. Naomi faced him fully now, calm but firm. They are not trying to destroy your house, Mr. Vaughn. Ethan stared down at his plate. Ella suddenly became very interested in her pancake. Naomi lowered her voice. They are trying to see who stays. Nathaniel felt the words hit somewhere deep beneath his ribs. Nobody had ever said it aloud before. Not therapists. Not nannies. Not teachers. Everyone called the twins difficult, unmanageable, spoiled. But Naomi looked at them as though she could see straight through the chaos into the grief underneath. Ethan finally whispered without looking up. Everybody leaves eventually. Silence swallowed the kitchen. Outside, snow drifted slowly across the city skyline, while inside the warmth from the stove wrapped around the room like something fragile and precious. Nathaniel looked at his son carefully. The little boy's shoulders were tense as though bracing for disappointment before it even arrived. Then Nathaniel looked at Naomi. She did not pity the twins. She understood them. Somehow that felt far more dangerous. By late afternoon, snow pressed softly against the tall windows of the Vaughn estate, while the city disappeared beneath gray winter clouds. Nathaniel sat at the far end of a polished conference table 30 blocks downtown, listening to three executives argue about acquisition numbers he normally would have dismantled in under 5 minutes. Today he heard almost nothing. His attention drifted repeatedly toward the family photo hidden beside his laptop screen. Claire smiling beneath orange autumn leaves. Ethan on her shoulders. Ella laughing so hard her eyes disappeared. Nathaniel loosened his tie for the third time in 20 minutes. Across the table, his business partner stopped speaking mid-sentence. Nathaniel. He blinked slowly. Sorry. Continue. But the words still would not settle into his mind. Instead, he kept hearing Ethan's tiny voice from breakfast. Everybody leaves eventually. At exactly 4:23 in the afternoon, his phone buzzed softly against the table. Mrs. Holloway. Nathaniel answered immediately. What happened? The older woman sounded startled. Nothing bad, sir. He exhaled carefully. The twins just returned from school. And there was a pause. Then, almost emotional disbelief filled her voice. Ella let another child borrow her crayons today. Nathaniel frowned in confusion. What? Her teacher called personally. Ethan also completed an entire reading assignment without shutting down halfway through. Nathaniel leaned back slowly in his chair while snow streaked across the skyscraper windows outside. They had a good day? Yes, sir. Another small pause followed. Miss Carter packed little notes inside their lunch boxes. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Notes. Mrs. Holloway chuckled softly. One said, "You are braver than you think." The other said, "The world is lucky you are in it." The billionaire stared silently at the Manhattan skyline, while something warm and painful twisted unexpectedly in his chest. Nobody had thought to do something so simple before. Not therapists charging $400 an hour. Not behavioral specialists. Not elite boarding consultants. Just a waitress carrying handwritten notes on folded napkins. Where is she now? He asked quietly. In the movie room. Nathaniel left the meeting 10 minutes later without explanation. By the time his car pulled through the iron gates of the estate, twilight had settled over the city and golden light glowed warmly behind the mansion windows. He stepped inside expecting the usual tension to return the moment the children saw him. Instead, he heard music drifting faintly from upstairs, followed by soft laughter. Real laughter again. Nathaniel climbed the staircase slowly and stopped outside the movie room doorway. The sight inside nearly shattered him. Blankets covered the floor like soft little islands. Empty cocoa mugs rested beside bowls of popcorn. Ethan sat curled beneath a comforter reading aloud from a dinosaur book, while Ella leaned sleepily against Naomi's shoulder. The waitress listened carefully to every word as though the little boy's voice mattered more than anything else in the world. Neither child noticed Nathaniel standing there at first. Then Ella looked up suddenly. "Dad." Her voice held no fear this time, just surprise. Naomi turned calmly. "You are home early." Nathaniel nodded once, unable to explain why seeing warmth inside this room made his chest ache so badly. Ethan held up the dinosaur book proudly. "I finished 3 chapters. Nathaniel stared at his son. 3 chapters. A month ago, Ethan could barely sit through a single page without frustration swallowing him whole. Naomi smiled faintly. Turns out he likes doing voices for the dinosaurs. Ethan immediately demonstrated an aggressive Tyrannosaurus growl that made Ella burst into exhausted giggles. Nathaniel laughed before he could stop himself. The sound startled everyone in the room, including him. Silence followed. Soft, gentle. Ella studied him carefully from beneath heavy, sleepy eyes. "You used to laugh more," she whispered. The room went still. Nathaniel felt the truth of those words settle heavily around him, while snow continued falling quietly outside the windows. Across the room, Naomi lowered her gaze slightly, giving him space to breathe through the pain without embarrassment. And for the first time since Claire died, Nathaniel realized something terrifying. This woman was not simply calming his children. She was slowly bringing all of them back to life. The first real storm of December rolled over Manhattan that night, covering the city in thick white snow while wind rattled softly against the tall windows of the Vaughn estate. Inside the mansion, warm light glowed from nearly every room for the first time in months. Mrs. Holloway quietly lit vanilla candles throughout the downstairs hallway because Ella had asked for them after dinner. The sweet scent drifted gently through the house, wrapping itself around old memories Nathaniel had spent nearly a year trying not to touch. Upstairs, Ethan and Ella were finally asleep. Nathaniel stood outside their bedroom doors longer than necessary, listening carefully to the silence. Peaceful silence. No crying. No nightmares. No tiny footsteps pacing the hallways at 2 in the morning. Just sleep. Real sleep. He walked downstairs slowly and found Naomi alone in the kitchen rinsing mugs beneath soft yellow light. Snowflakes swirled outside the windows behind her while jazz music played quietly from her phone. Nathaniel loosened the top button of his dress shirt and leaned against the marble counter. "You should be charging me therapist rates," he said quietly. Naomi smiled faintly without looking up. "I do not think therapists usually make dinosaur-shaped pancakes." Nathaniel gave a tired laugh beneath his breath. The sound still felt unfamiliar. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The kitchen hummed softly with warmth from the dishwasher and the faint crackle of logs burning somewhere deeper inside the mansion. Then Nathaniel asked the question that had been sitting heavily in his chest for days. "How are you doing this?" Naomi turned off the water slowly. "Doing what?" "Getting through to them." His voice lowered carefully. Nobody else could. Naomi dried her hands with a dish towel before answering. "Because everybody else treated them like a problem to solve." Nathaniel looked away briefly. The truth in her words stung more than he expected. Naomi rested against the counter across from him. Children know when adults are trying to manage them instead of understand them. Nathaniel studied her quietly. "And you understand them?" For the first time since arriving at the estate, Naomi hesitated. Her eyes drifted toward the snowy darkness outside the windows. "I understand what it feels like to think people leave because you are too difficult to love." The room grew very still. Nathaniel straightened slightly. Naomi rarely talked about herself. The twins adored her, yet she carried sadness the way some people carried old scars beneath clothing nobody else could see. "What happened?" he asked softly. Naomi folded the towel carefully between her hands before speaking. "My mother worked 3 jobs when I was growing up in Baltimore. Mostly night shifts." Her voice remained calm, but distant somehow, as though she were walking carefully through old memories. "I spent most of my childhood raising my little brother." Nathaniel listened. Quietly. His name was Marcus. He was funny, smart, obsessed with space documentaries. A faint smile touched her lips for exactly 1 second before fading again. But he struggled after our mom got sick. School became harder. He started believing he was a burden. Nathaniel's chest tightened. Naomi looked down at the folded towel in her hands. People kept calling him difficult. Silence settled heavily between them. Outside, snow continued falling beneath the glowing city skyline. "What happened to him?" Nathaniel asked gently. Naomi swallowed once before answering. "One day he stopped believing anybody would stay." The The pain beneath those words was quiet but enormous. Nathaniel felt it instantly. Naomi inhaled carefully and forced a small smile afterward, as though apologizing for becoming vulnerable at all. "That is why I do not scare easily when children act out," she whispered. "Most of the time they are not trying to push you away." Nathaniel stared at her across the kitchen while something shifted painfully inside his chest. For months he had convinced himself he was protecting the twins by keeping the house controlled, structured, distant. But Naomi saw through all of it with terrifying clarity. Ethan and Ella were not angry children. They were grieving children waiting to see who loved them enough to remain. Nathaniel looked toward the staircase leading upstairs where his children finally slept peacefully beneath warm blankets and vanilla candlelight. Then he looked back at Naomi. "You stayed," he said quietly. Naomi's eyes softened slightly. "Somebody should." 3 days later, the Vaughn estate no longer felt like a place people tiptoed through. The change was subtle at first. Music in the mornings. Half-finished board games left on the coffee table. Tiny sneakers abandoned near the fireplace because Ella insisted shoes made hot chocolate taste less magical. But by Friday evening, even the staff moved differently through the halls. The house no longer felt frozen in grief. It felt lived in again. Nathaniel noticed it the moment he walked through the front doors after work. The scent of tomato sauce and garlic drifted from the kitchen while laughter echoed somewhere upstairs. He loosened his coat slowly, listening. Ethan shouted something unintelligible followed by Naomi laughing so hard she nearly dropped a spoon. Nathaniel stood still for a moment beneath the chandelier, absorbing the sound like sunlight after a long winter. Mrs. Holloway appeared beside him carrying folded laundry. "You should prepare yourself," she whispered with suspicious amusement. Nathaniel frowned slightly. "For what?" Before she could answer, Ella flew around the corner wearing an oversized apron covered in flour. "Dad," she yelled excitedly. "We are making pizza." Nathaniel blinked once. Flour dusted her cheeks. There was tomato sauce in her hair. She looked happier than he had seen her since Claire died. Ethan rushed down the hallway behind her holding a rolling pin like a sword. "Mine is dinosaur-shaped." "It absolutely is not," Naomi called from the kitchen. "Right now it looks like Florida." Nathaniel followed the voices slowly and stopped in the doorway. The kitchen was chaos. Warm, loud, ridiculous chaos. Flour covered nearly every surface. Tiny handprints decorated the marble countertops. Ella stood on a chair aggressively sprinkling cheese, while Ethan argued passionately about whether pepperoni could technically become extinct. Naomi stood between them laughing helplessly, sleeves rolled up, curls tied back with a red scarf Ella had apparently declared magical. For a second Nathaniel simply watched them. Nobody noticed him immediately, and that somehow made the moment feel painfully real. Ethan accidentally dropped shredded cheese onto the floor and immediately froze, waiting for someone to yell. Nathaniel recognized the reaction instantly. Children learned fear through repetition. Naomi looked down calmly. 5-second rule, she announced. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "Seriously?" "Absolutely not," she replied, sweeping it away. "But your face was hilarious." Ella burst into laughter so loud she nearly tipped sideways off the chair. Ethan laughed too. Nathaniel felt something inside his chest crack open quietly. Claire used to laugh like that in this kitchen. Loud, unfiltered, alive. Naomi finally noticed him. Standing there. Her smile softened immediately. "You are home early again." Nathaniel glanced at his watch. He had left an investor dinner halfway through dessert because suddenly the idea of sitting through another room full of strangers discussing stock projections felt unbearable compared to this. "Apparently," he answered quietly. Ella jumped down from the chair and grabbed his hand before he could react. "Come help." Nathaniel looked startled. "I do not cook." "Neither does Ethan," Naomi said calmly while handing him an apron. That has not stopped him. Ethan proudly held up a lopsided piece of dough. "This one accidentally looks like Texas now." For the next hour, the billionaire who controlled half the Manhattan skyline stood in his luxury kitchen arguing with 7-year-olds about pizza toppings while flour coated the sleeves of his expensive dress shirt. At one point, Ella laughed so hard soda came out of her nose. At another point, Ethan carefully placed one pepperoni slice aside because Mom always made a heart shape in the middle. Silence briefly settled over the kitchen after those words. The twins lowered their eyes instinctively, bracing for sadness to return like it always did whenever Claire was mentioned. But Naomi simply picked up another pepperoni slice and placed it beside the first one. Then we better do it right, she whispered softly. Nathaniel looked at the small heart shape resting in the center of the pizza, while emotion tightened painfully in his throat. Across the counter, Ethan smiled for the first time without hesitation. And in that warm, messy kitchen filled with flour, candlelight, and children finally unafraid to remember their mother out loud, Nathaniel realized something terrifyingly simple. The twins were no longer waiting for Naomi to leave. They were already beginning to love her. Saturday evening arrived wrapped in golden lights and falling snow as black SUVs lined the entrance of the Manhattan Grand Regency Hotel. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers shimmered above hundreds of New York's wealthiest guests dressed in dark tuxedos and glittering gowns. Waiters moved silently between marble columns carrying silver trays while a string quartet played near the enormous Christmas tree at the center of the room. Nathaniel adjusted the cuff of his jacket near the ballroom entrance while Ethan and Ella stood beside him unusually quiet. The annual Vaughn Foundation Gala had always been one of the city's most photographed events. Last year, Claire had hosted it effortlessly with warmth that softened even the coldest people in the room. This year, Nathaniel almost canceled it entirely. Then Ella tugged gently on his sleeve. "Where is Naomi?" she whispered anxiously. Nathaniel looked toward the lobby just as the elevator doors opened. Naomi stepped out wearing a simple dark green dress beneath her winter coat, her curls resting softly against her shoulders. She paused immediately when she noticed the crowd. Expensive jewelry flashed beneath ballroom lights. Wealthy socialites turned subtly to glance at her before quickly pretending not to stare. Naomi looked suddenly uncomfortable, as though she had accidentally wandered into someone else's world. Ella gasped happily. "You came." Before Naomi could answer, the little girl sprinted across the marble floor and wrapped both arms tightly around her waist. Ethan followed right behind her, clutching Naomi's hand almost immediately. The reaction did not go unnoticed. Conversations around the ballroom slowed subtly. Several guests exchanged curious looks. Nathaniel walked toward Naomi carefully. "You look beautiful tonight," he said before thinking. Naomi blinked, slightly surprised. "Thank you." Her voice softened. "You all clean up pretty nicely yourselves." Ethan adjusted his tiny bow tie proudly while Ella whispered loudly. "Dad almost wore 2 different shoes." Nathaniel sighed. "Traitor." Naomi laughed quietly, and once again that warm, unfamiliar feeling spread painfully through his chest. Across the ballroom, an older woman wearing diamonds leaned toward another guest and whispered something while glancing at Naomi. Nathaniel noticed immediately. So did Naomi. Her smile faded just slightly. "I should probably stay out of the way," she murmured. "You are not in the way," Nathaniel answered firmly. Before Naomi could respond, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly for the foundation presentation. Guests gathered near the stage while photographers crowded the front rows. Nathaniel guided the twins toward their reserved table, but halfway across the ballroom, Ethan suddenly froze. Completely froze. His breathing changed instantly. Fast. Sharp. His small fingers tightened painfully around Naomi's hand. The noise inside the ballroom grew louder. Glasses clinking. Music swelling. Hundreds of conversations blending together beneath bright lights and cameras. Ethan's face went pale. "Too loud," he whispered shakily. Nathaniel knelt immediately beside him. "Ethan," but the little boy could not answer. Panic filled his eyes while the crowd continued shifting around them. Several nearby guests stared openly now. Nathaniel's chest tightened in helpless fear. Then Naomi crouched gently in front of Ethan, shielding him from the ballroom without touching him immediately. Her voice stayed low and calm beneath the noise. "Hey," she whispered softly. "Look at me." Ethan's breathing trembled hard. Naomi slowly held out her hand. "Remember the dinosaur breathing?" The little boy nodded weakly. "Good. We do it together." Naomi inhaled deeply and slowly. Ethan copied her. Once. Twice. Again. Around them, the ballroom faded into silence for Nathaniel. He watched his son cling to Naomi's voice like a lifeline while tears burned unexpectedly behind his own eyes. Ethan finally leaned forward and buried his face against Naomi's shoulder. "I do not like everybody staring," he whispered. Naomi gently rested her cheek against his curls. "Then let them stare at me instead." The room had gone almost completely quiet now. Wealthy strangers watched openly from every direction. Nathaniel slowly stood beside them, feeling something shift permanently inside his chest. Across the ballroom, one woman whispered softly, "Who is she?" But before Nathaniel could answer, Ella lifted her tiny chin proudly toward the entire room. "She is family," she said. Snow-covered Manhattan in silver by the time the gala ended. Outside the Grand Regency Hotel, cameras flashed against the winter night while chauffeurs opened car doors beneath glowing streetlights. But inside the Vaughn limousine, everything was quiet except for the soft sound of Ethan sleeping against Naomi's shoulder. Ella lay curled beside her twin beneath Nathaniel's coat, tiny fingers still wrapped around Naomi's hand even in sleep. The city lights moved silently across the windows as the driver carried them uptown through falling snow. Nathaniel sat across from them, unable to look away. Hours earlier, the ballroom had felt cold and suffocating. Wealthy strangers, forced smiles, endless conversations about money and influence. But then Ethan panicked beneath those bright chandeliers, and Naomi had done something Nathaniel still could not fully explain. She had made his son feel safe without making him feel weak. She had protected his dignity. That mattered more than anyone in the room would ever understand. Ella stirred sleepily against the seat cushion. "Did we embarrass you?" she whispered suddenly. Nathaniel frowned immediately. "What?" Her sleepy little voice trembled. "At the party." Naomi looked down at the child gently. Ethan remained asleep against her shoulder, breathing slow and peaceful for the first time all evening. Nathaniel leaned forward carefully. "Why would you think that?" Ella hesitated before answering. "Because people stared." The pain in those tiny words hit Nathaniel harder than any business failure ever had. He looked at his daughter for a long moment before speaking softly. "Sweetheart, people stare at things they do not understand." Ella blinked up at him. "Like what?" Nathaniel glanced toward Naomi. She sat quietly beneath the dim limousine lights, curls slightly undone from the evening, one hand resting protectively against Ethan's back while snow drifted past the windows behind her. Warmth, kindness, patience, love without conditions. Nathaniel swallowed hard. "Like someone who changes everything," he answered quietly. Naomi lowered her eyes immediately, almost embarrassed by the sincerity in his voice. The limousine pulled through the estate gates a few minutes later. Inside the mansion, vanilla candles still glowed softly along the staircase where Mrs. Holloway had left them burning. The house no longer felt hollow. It felt warm, alive somehow. Nathaniel carefully carried Ethan upstairs while Naomi tucked a blanket around Ella in her room. Snow tapped softly against the windows while the little girl fought sleep long enough to whisper one final question. "You are coming back tomorrow, right?" Naomi smiled gently while brushing curls away from Ella's forehead. "Yes." Ella relaxed instantly beneath the blankets. "Good," she whispered. "Because this house gets sad when you leave." Downstairs, Nathaniel stood alone beside the Christmas tree after the children finally fell asleep. Soft golden lights reflected across the dark windows while the storm continued outside. Naomi descended the staircase quietly a moment later, holding her coat in one hand. "It is late," she said softly. "I should go." Nathaniel looked at the coat, then at the front door beyond her shoulder. For the first time in months, the thought of someone leaving made panic tighten inside his chest. Naomi noticed the expression immediately. "Mr. Vaughn." He shook his head slightly, as though trying to organize thoughts he had buried for far too long. "Claire used to say this house was too big to feel empty," he admitted quietly. "After she died, I realized she was wrong." Naomi remained silent. Nathaniel looked toward the staircase where his children slept peacefully above them. "Then you walked into our lives carrying coffee, and somehow," his voice cracked slightly before he steadied it again. "Somehow they started smiling again." Naomi's eyes softened beneath the Christmas lights. Nathaniel stepped closer slowly. "Ethan sleeps through the night now." Ella laughs again. "And for the first time in almost a year," he exhaled shakily. "I do too." The mansion stood completely still around them. Warm candlelight, falling snow, the faint scent of cinnamon lingering in the air. Naomi looked down briefly, overwhelmed by the honesty in his voice. Then Nathaniel said the words that changed everything. "Do not leave." Silence followed. Deep, trembling, real. Upstairs, somewhere beyond the soft glow of the hallway lights, two children slept peacefully inside a home that no longer felt broken.